today's presentations. We have Oliver Laing presenting, and today he will be, I'll start by giving an introduction of what Oliver does. He's a PhD candidate researching transport behaviour, culture and policy at University of Western Australia. And today he'll be discussing the economic case for investing, he'll be discussing cycling policy and why people in Perth think it's normal to drive 700 metres just to go to the shops. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Oliver.
Thanks, Tom. Hey everybody, thanks for coming down. And first of all, I also want to say thank Charlotte as well, because without her, and she had a baby about 3 weeks ago, so she was just like a dynamo for this whole thing, and without her we wouldn't be here today. Thanks for coming down. Probably talk for about half an hour or so. It's going to jump all over the shop, but my first question was, how does cycling policy encourage people to cycle short distances? Because popping out of the shops by bike, to me, seems like the low-hanging fruit of the cycling campaign is a good way to increase cycling mode share. But in practice, anecdotal evidence suggests that suburban supermarkets, this is just me going down to my local supermarket across the metro area, cars outnumber bikes by something like 400 to 1. Why is this? So today I engage in a smattering of sociological theory. I look at the interaction between cycling policy and the practice of cycling. I look overseas for bike-friendly examples, make a few suggestions that might assist local policy makers and state government policy makers to work more effectively together. And plus I spend quite a bit of time talking about cars as well. So, as I said, currently I'm just a brief biographical note. I've been back at uni since 2012. I went back as a mature-age student. My research straddles intersecting political science, public policy and governance, sociology and anthropology. It's also got a smattering of planning and transportation studies thrown in there for measure as well. My motto has always been Jack of all trades, master of none. And my working life's been like a DJ, bike mechanic, which I was doing yesterday, freelance writer and researcher, and I've had a lifelong obsession with the bicycle and a growing awareness of the pressing need to reimagine our cities and the political implications of cycling as a transportation mode choice in the face of an overarching system of automobility. You might have some idea of what I'm here talking to you today. So I grew up here in Perth in the 70s, 80s and 90s, while it was a sleepy outpost on the fringes of this great and ancient continent. It seemed to me as no one ended up here by choice. Living in Perth was just some sort of cosmic lottery booby prize that separated you from the great cultural going on of Europe or even over east. Wrong side of the wrong continent and the wrong hemisphere, as Tim Winton put it. And here's a quote from Tim Winton in the same book as well. Maybe you've read that already. In this, he talks about automobiles opening up suburban Perth where it wasn't. They liberated from the drudgery and brought us an ease of movement that was once unthinkable. And a suburb like I think he grew up in Dweller, would have been untenable, perhaps even inconceivable without the assumption that every household in them was supported by a motor vehicle. And then he goes on to say our cities are built to accommodate the car as much as the citizen, and the outward creep of low density suburbs is an unsustainable price we pay for our enviable new mobility. And this, I opened Google Maps at random. I just found a suburb. It was Butler. And the first house I looked at had this huge, big-ass garage at the front, like every other new house has. And he says even our homes with their integrated garages have been steadily modified, disfigured in many instances to adapt to the frontier vehicles of domestic life. So, it's great, isn't it? I read it like 2 nights ago. I was like, yes, I've got to use that.
Yeah.
As a newly minted driver in the 90s, it seemed to be that congestion, parking problems, rush hour were things that other cities had. Fast forward to 2009, I returned from a long stint overseas and interstate, only to find that the idyllic yet slightly dull vibe of Perth had been overrun by the boom years. 1,000 new car regos a week, mainly due to people flocking here, plus an inheritance of patchy public transport infrastructure and chronic car dependency, meant that the city was increasingly gridlocked. Such a scenario needs no more explanation. suffice to say, it's incentivised a small but growing band of people to get on their bikes to ride to work and sometimes even to the shops. But nevertheless, the cycling mode share in the city is around 1.3%, so this is certainly not Amsterdam. And I was in Amsterdam recently taking a few photos. I love this one. He's just leaning into the corner. What a cool dude. And so I talk about the term habitus, and that was popularised by the influential French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. And the roots of the term sort of reach back into sociology's past. It's basically a fancy way of saying habits or self-evident common sense that's been inculcated for society. The Dutch academic wrote in relation to cycling habitus that it refers to learned practices and standards that have become so much part of ourselves they feel self-evident, and natural habitus is our culturally and socially shaped second nature. What we learn as a member of society in a specific social position is literally incorporated, absorbed into our bodies and becomes ourselves. Since discovering the term, I've been wondering how we can develop an Australian cycling habitus. One point that Coit has made was that interdependencies between nations has become more profound under the overarching rubric of globalisation. So the nation state is less effectively able to encourage certain behaviours than it might have once been able to do. And the Dutch have got this cycling history, which is kind of represented as a quintessential facet of being Dutch, much the same as barbecuing might be for Australians. But you'll find that it's kind of over time that's been sort of eroded by immigration and the fact that new migrants to Holland maybe aren't so willing to cycle. So, I did spend 3 weeks in Amsterdam as part of my studies. I was there, it was called Planning with Cycling City. It's a fantastic course. I got to rub shoulders with students and academics from around the world. I got to explore Amsterdam as well as Groningen, Zwolle and Utrecht. Again, I probably don't need to go into too much detail in front of you guys, as no doubt some of you have thundered around the cobbles of the Netherlands on an upright Omar fiets, swerving around an occasional stone tourist whilst marvelling at the cycling infrastructure and sheer bike-mindedness of the Dutch. So, yeah, that's sort of talking about habitus again, and J. Harry Ray, an American political scientist, talks about it's the manner in which biking is integrated into the consciousness of Dutch people that is ultimately the most impressive, and the actions of government suggest that the intent is to maintain bicycles prominence. There's a lot of theories around it, like why is it that the Dutch cycling didn't drop off in the face of increased car usage as much as other countries, and sort of the consensus seems to be it is around the Calvinist heritage, because the north of the country where it's more Calvinist it has higher rates of cycling, in the Catholic south it's not so much. And also they have this political system, I think they call it the Polder system of politics, which is more consensus driven than you find in Australian politics. Dutch culture does seem a bit more communitarian than Australia, where we're, to be honest, increasingly individualistic and materialistic. But also, as I was saying before, cycling's kind of become more of a self-conscious lifestyle rather than, just an unself-conscious habit. And that's kind of been replicated here in Australia, I find as a cyclist myself, you can get kind of tarred as being, he's the cycling guy or whatever. And to be honest, I want to see everyone ride a bike. I don't want it to be like a little niche thing that just a few people do. We need like 30% mode share, not like 1.3%. I just love some of these photos of kids and parents on bikes just cruising around in Amsterdam. And this is an approximation of the historical mode share of cycling development in 9 European cities, with Amsterdam's that blue line there. So you can see before, in the 20s and 30s it was really high. It even went up during the Second World War because people didn't have access to motor cars, and then it just free fall. And this happened in Australia as well, in Sweden, that's Manchester there. They didn't get any travel to work data or censuses back then, so that's why it's crosshatched. But you see in most cities that has levelled out and come back a little bit. So some of the theories around why it's come back stronger in Northern Europe is that it didn't get eroded as much as it did in Australia. Oh, that's right, I need to press play. Video here, I'm just going to play. Sorry, the sound's just
You
coming
just
out
sing.
here. No, it's just kind of like really crazy music anyway. But this is just a fellow student put this together. Just rush hour in Amsterdam on Vesperzijde, which runs along the Amstel Canal, like one of the busiest stretches of Amsterdam's city. I found in Amsterdam, as a cyclist growing up in Western cultures, being able to cycle with a lack of care that I need here, and being able to do it relatively safely, and not feeling like, oh my god, I'm going to die, like at every instance. You know, not wearing a helmet, looking at Google Maps to try to work out where I was going, you know, racing my fellow students, you know, riding a bike that was relatively unroadworthy. Like, I would never do any of those things in Anglo-cycling context, but there I felt relatively safe, to be honest. You know, that's not to, you know, say that it's just all peaches and cream. There's idiots there as well. So, anyway, back to the talk. So, talking about you know, the historic reassertion of Dutch cycling culture in the face of politically mandated automobility suggests that cultural transformation is possible. So, the cycling heritage of the Netherlands was kind of re-established by the Dutch Provo movement, which sought to politicise individual choices and decisions during the 60s and 70s. It was kind of a melange of capitalist critique and absurdist street theatre, and a key platform of the Provo was the light bicycle plan. 50 bikes were deployed in the world's first short-lived bike share scheme. I think they all got stolen within a couple of days, or else the cops took them off the streets. But yeah, you know, it was rhetorically important for later generations of bike campaigners. And the Provo actually got into coalitions in government in Amsterdam during the 70s. An extract from an interview with modern-day cycling activists highlights the role that pro-cycling organisations play, even in a nation uncommonly supportive of active transportation. She said, "Everyone thinks the Netherlands is a cycling paradise, but if we didn't put bikes on the agenda, they'd be forgotten. It's natural to cycle, but it's not natural to make policy." Worldwide, contemporary cycling enthusiasts look to these Northern European countries for inspiration, and the natural cycling common sense of these countries looms large in our cycling mythos. Is it possible to develop a cycling culture by wholesale importation of infrastructure and cycling norms for these nations? And how does the Dutch, you know, the archetype of Dutch cycling frame our understandings of cycling infrastructure and politics and culture elsewhere? For me, it seems that the importation of spatial designs and cycle chic from Copenhagen or Amsterdam of itself appears a little bit inadequate. You've got to actually, you know, have it work for your local conditions. So I said I'd talk about the car. I took this on my commute to my workplace. It's on Canning Bridge, the morning rush hour into the city on the freeway. So automobility, really, you know, it's a social scientific term that, you know, basically about comprising automobile use and everything that makes it possible, you know, the roads, the highways, the rules, parking structures, all of that stuff as well. And this is where it comes down to why do we think it's normal to drive 700 metres to the shops? My answer would be that society is set up to normalise this state of affairs, and this car-centric habitus has affirmed for most since birth. It's a phenomenon that has only accelerated as the feedback loop between perceptions of danger on the streets concerning letting a child cycle and car driving has tightened. Many kids of my generation still rode to school, a transferred habit that in my case has survived into adulthood. It would seem as a society we're failing here. Whilst the decrease in childhood cycling rates is by no means a new discovery, such a phenomenon further marginalises cycling as it's seen as a sport or leisure pursuit rather than as a common sense means of transportation in a congested city. And often the critique when you're looking at like comments on, you know, blogs or news articles about cycling is, you know, go to a velodrome. You know, it's like, it's not just a sport, you know. and you know, motorcyclists don't want to go to a velodrome anyway. And my point is that automobility requires broad societal consent. So, you know, the benefits are diffused, but they're not universally shared. If you live on a busy road, you're probably going to be pretty pissed off about the traffic noise and pollution. But if you live in the western suburbs and it's nice and quiet, you know, you're not going to think about that stuff so much. And it's kind of disguised. So, you know, the interventions make this regime completely possible. And this quote is pretty telling. The representation of car driving as now autonomous movement is also disguising such conditions. And yesterday Andrew was talking about the economic case for cycling. And economics, they talk about externalities, you know, so, you know, big multinationals or even small businesses want to try to externalise as many costs as they can, and that's what's happened in the case of automobility as well. So those costs have been put onto society as a whole rather than on the individual car user. So, you know, that's the systemic subsidisation of traffic infrastructure at the expense of transportation alternatives. So you see that with the, you know, the argument about row 8 and all this stuff that's been going on with, you know, broken promises around public transport as well. One of my favourite Marxists is Andre Gortz. His social ideology of the motor car really inspired me. This came out the year I was born. He was a leftist social philosopher based in France. He fled Austria during the Second World War. You know, it's not really strictly fair to call him a neo-Marxist, an existentialist or a radical, because he was just so diverse. Along with Ivan Illich and Rachel Carson, he was one of the first writers to link ecology to unsustainable economic and transportation practices. And here he says, the worst thing about cars is that they are like castles or villas by the sea, luxury goods invented for the exclusive pleasure of a very rich minority, and which in conception and nature were never intended for the people. Unlike the vacuum cleaner, the radio or the bicycle, which retain their use value when everyone has one, the car is only desirable and useful insofar as the masses don't have one. This is how in both conception and original purpose the car is a luxury good. And the essence of luxury is that it can't be democratised. If everyone can have luxury, no one gets an advantage from it. On the contrary, everyone diddles, cheats and frustrates everyone else and is diddled, cheated and frustrated in return. Sounds like going for a morning commute to me. And he goes on to say, this is pretty much common knowledge in the case of seaside villas, but that no politicians have yet dared to claim that to democratise the right to a vacation would mean a villa for everyone. If that was the case, 13 or 14 million French families in 1973 would have had to have 10 metres of coast each, which would have equated to 14,000 kilometres of beach, 140,000 kilometres of beach in order for them to all have their share. Now, that's insane. So when it comes to car space, why don't we think the same way? Doesn't it deprive others who use the roads, like pedestrians, cyclists and bus drivers, of road space as well? Doesn't it lose its use value when everyone has his or her own car? And yet there are plenty of politicians who insist that every family has the right to at least one car, and it's up to the government to make it possible for everyone to park conveniently, drive easily in the city and go on holiday at the same time as everyone else, going 70 miles an hour on the road to vacation spots. Why is the car treated like a sacred cow? Why, unlike other private goods, isn't it recognised as an anti-social luxury? And that's not, I mean, I own a car. I'd like to get rid of it. I haven't quite managed to do that yet, but maybe one day. And this is his basic point, was that bourgeois ideology, which is the kind of thing you would have said if you were a French existentialist in 1973, and that it is a luxury good. And yeah, just talking quickly about Western Australian car habits. So we've got a really high car ownership here in Western Australia, 840 cars per 1,000 people. If you, yeah, I think it is. If you look elsewhere, I think overall for Australia, 756 vehicles per 1,000. And internationally, Singapore's 151, Denmark 481. UK and the Netherlands and Japan are all around the 500 mark. US is 786. I was surprised that Western Australia has more than the US. Monaco is actually slightly higher at 842. And I think Nepal's got like 7 cars per 1,000 people. Perth is an archetypal auto city. Its transportation and planning priorities include being demand responsive rather than demand management oriented, particularly concerning roads and parking. The priority is always road funding. The auto subsidisation, as I was mentioning before, is hidden. There's insecure funding for active transportation. Greenfield development is prioritised, and the ideal home is a one-storey and separate place as well. You know, despite all this, there's been quite a lot of academic research that's proved that peak car has come and gone. So that was around 2005. There's also evidence to show that young adults are getting their licence a bit later, or it's not quite as important as it was for people of my generation. It's theorised that that's because of information technology, that's not happening as much. But, you know, it really depends on where you live. I was on the radio yesterday and one of the callers on 720 said, you know, what happens if you live in Lansdale and have to commute to Shenley Park? It's a, you know, cycling's an inner city obsession. And, you know, in a lot of ways that is true, but if we actually could link public transport and cycling together, it would be much easier. This very confusing graph comes from Jeff Kenworthy from World Transport Policy and Practice from 2014. It's a total modal split by travel distance for all passenger modes in 41 global cities in 2005-06. So there's Perth, just up there. I think you can guess Blue's car, and then you've got Hong Kong down here, and a few other global cities like Sydney, which has slightly higher public transport. I think that explains it a bit better. Now, I've probably gone way over time, so I might just leave this. But we'll keep going. I'm talking about utility cycling in Australia. I really think Perth's an interesting site for investigating barriers to increasing utility cycling, because we're blessed with a mild climate, kind topography, plentiful sunshine, and it seems like an ideal place to grow cycling. But, you know, we've got a relatively extensive network of cycling paths already, although there's significant gaps in the network as well. Commuter cycling in Perth has undergone a bit of a renaissance, with about a 46% increase between 2009 and 2013. However, similar to other Anglophone nations like the UK and the US, increases in cycling mode share derive from historically low participation rates. Despite rhetorical support for active transportation, the levels of funding for cycling infrastructure remain underdeveloped. As you can see, this quote from West Cycle says that key decision makers continue to underplay the contribution that cycling makes to the economy and in public policy areas such as health, transportation, community development, environment and tourism. And you know, also the media, I think, has a huge role to play in that. This quote from Zach Furness talks well about that, the habitual mischaracterisation of utilitarian cycling, urban cyclists and everything. I do think that is changing a bit. I've had quite a bit of supportive media myself about coming here today. The little tweet I did, I think that really says the facts about cycling. Obviously my reach on Twitter is really poor because this wasn't favoured at all, but it was there. Cycling in WA, 1% of total spending on roads, 2% mode share, 4% fatalities, and the RAC's research suggests that the spend on return of investment is something between 340 to 550%. I think that's pretty incredible. So this is the DOT's, this came out in October of last year. The legend is basically blue is completed PSPs, orange is proposed paths, and green is funded paths under construction. You know, my opinion as a cyclist is that PSPs are world class. I've talked about this with Heinrich as well at Laing. Unfortunately, the spine, and this is what I typify the PSP as, it's the spine of the network, but we really need the arteries as well. So if you look at this from the Office of the Auditor General's report, this is cycling incidences, crashes between 2006 and 2010. And, you know, obviously cyclists are riding a lot of places where there ain't bike paths, or the bike paths are patchy. And, you know, I found that the OAG report was fantastic. If you want to look at a critique of cycling governance in Western Australia, it's a fantastic place to start. I would really like to see the recommendations of that put into effect. Whether that happens, I'm going to hold my breath. The main conclusions of the report were that the priority arterial cycle network is incomplete. I think we know that. Cycle routes through the CBD are minimal. The local cycle network is inconsistent and unconnected. Incomplete data and analysis on cycle movements and crashes limits planning. There's gaps in planning which will delay the growth and growth in cycling and societal benefits that that will provide as well. And you know, we love graphs. Well, I do as a social scientist. I love good graphs. And here's one from Cameron Munro's latest Australian Cycling Participation Report, with the yearly, monthly and weekly totals of cycling participation in WA. There's a whole lot more data. He is a complete quantitative guru. A lot more data involved there. But it shows, to me, it shows a real incipient demand for cycling infrastructure. Even, you know, with people, 45% of the population riding in the last year, and the fact that the bikes have outsold cars for the last 10 years or something as well. So just to get on to the politics of cycling briefly before I wrap up. In my opinion, I think the politicisation of cycling will help a car-dependent society confront land use patterns and transportation biases, like critical mass did in the US, which has been heralded as an expression of solidarity, passion and critical thinking, fundamental to any progressive movement. Yeah, you know, I used to go to occasional critical mass in Sydney. I don't know, did it ever really take off here in Perth?
No, I think that was one or two attempts. It was never really critical. The mass wasn't there.
The critical mass was not there. Rachel Aldred, who's a UK cycling academic, suggests that cycling only became politicised once it ceased to be every day. And some other cycling academics, John Putra and I can't remember his name, Mr. Bugler, suggested that above all, public and political support needs to be garnered before infrastructure and implementation decisions are taken. In the current fashion for cycling, it needs to become political support for cycling to become embodied in everyday lives of all citizens, even if they just want to go to the shops for 2 litres of milk. Cycling must spur comprehensive change at the institutional level in order for it to become permanent. Fundamentally, I think the politicisation of cycling can transform it from an individual lifestyle choice into a meaningful social issue. There's a graph of increases in cycling for 14 cities with comprehensive efforts. So, you know, like you look at what London's done, and since 2006, it's increased again, but, you know, between 2003 and 2006, it went from 1% to 2%. Groningen, right at the upper end of the scale, pretty much stayed the same. So it does show that, you know, getting the policy and infrastructure aligned does lead to increases in inflation.
I think the interesting one there, sorry, is Paris. It went threefold after the introduction of Benelux.
Yes.
So they had a very successful scheme, and boom, cycling took off everywhere else.
You got it. Okay, so I'm wondering if there is the potential for an Australian cycling habitus. Political scientists like using the term normative. They bandy it around as much as possible, basically talking about norms and, you know, rules of behaviour. I mean, I would suggest that it's the lack of infrastructure, the commuting distances, the planning of our cities, but also social mores as well. It's like, you know, we don't want to go to work and be hot and sweaty. You know, people always argue about all that kind of stuff, want to get to work looking really schmick. And you know, if you are cycling long distances in a hot climate, that can be problematic. I would suggest that the contemporary cycling promotion strategies do encourage certain participants, but not everyone. And that the policy discourse of livable cities will remain rhetorical until hegemonic automobility is overcome to some degree. And, you know, like I think even mammals have a part to play in this, you know, because I'm a mammal myself, and, you know, we get a lot of bad press. But I think we're all ambassadors for cycling. Everyone that's a cyclist, whether you're a sports cyclist, a leisure cyclist, or just go commuting, is, you know, we can all make a difference. And, you know, Harry Ray says again, cultural change is necessary in order for the bike to be widely adopted as a transportation alternative. At the same time, that leads to further cultural change. So it's definitely a feedback loop, which is kind of shown here, which there's a social scientific model called the dynamics of social practice that's been building on past sociological work by Giddens and Bourdieu. Basically, practices have got a few different elements. We've got materials, So in the case of bikes, that's low bicycle ownership, lack of cycle paths, hygiene facilities at work are important and lacking. You've got the meanings of cycling, which I've talked a bit about. So symbolic meanings, ideas and aspirations. You know, the meanings around it being unsafe on the roads, that commuter cyclists are insane or overly committed, all that sort of stuff. And then the competencies of cycling as well. So all of these things form they're very hard to control feedback loop, and policy is only just one part of it. Once that genie's out of the bottle, we don't know what's going to happen with it. Advocates can make a big difference. Individual cyclists, you know, certain moments in time, and you know, they warn, these academics warn that it's important to remember that social theories do not lead directly to change. And just to finish up, I love that picture. That's in Holland as well. This guy's just cruising around in his suit with a couple of boxes. And, you know, the bicycle is cosmopolitan, green, egalitarian, informal. And this was Kuipers talking about cycling in the Netherlands. She said that the bicycle kind of has a status without ostentation. And that does indicate power, but refusing to acknowledge power. And in a way, that's talking around, you know, perceptions of middle-class cycling. And you know, it really is a very middle-class pursuit in Australia. I'd love it to see it being demographically dispersed amongst all populations in Australia. And just to, you know, finish by posing one more question, as I'm so fond of doing, you know, would more people ride if there was appropriate infrastructure and supporting conditions? I think that a wholesale shift in the norms of transportation will take much more than bicycle symbols on busy roads. Here's some suggested readings. There's a lot there, but I can show you further, and we'll come back to that if anyone's interested. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's what I feel like now, actually.
Hi. Just as well as, thanks for the lecture as well. A couple of years ago I was riding to work from Yokine to the city and was going on a cycle path along Alexander Drive. I was told by a guy about my age, a bit younger with a couple of kids, to get off the footpath and stick to the road. So I was just wondering, like, educating just the general public who's going to cycle, is there any model moves towards that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more that can be done generally with education of the driving public. I mean, my understanding it is actually illegal to ride on a footpath if you're over 12 years of age. But
no, this was a cycle path.
Oh, it's a cycle path. Okay, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, he's obviously saw weird form. I think, you know, like I showed that picture of the information campaign here, you know, if you don't see them, neither will their family. But if you contrast that spending and the budget that they have for that campaign with the Office of Road Safety to what they have on drink driving or speeding, it's like, you know, 0.5%. And I mean, drink driving and speeding, my fiancée is a emergency nurse. She's sitting down here in the purple. I'm just going to embarrass her a little bit. You know, she sees, you know, the repercussions of drink driving and speeding all the time at Roll, but also, you know, some of the most horrific accidents is people on bikes as well. Sorry, John. Sorry if I answered your question.
Yeah.
I think more can be done there. A lot more can be done. John.
Just before I raise what I was going to, the city of Stirling considers that every path is a de facto shared path, that it's not actually illegal to ride on virtually every footpath. That's probably why this isn't a designated path. So the guy was right and you were right. You were both right. You just have different.
The one sort of through the park, you know, Yokine Reserve, it's got a cycling.
Those we have specifically permitted cycling on and put it in with a 20k speed limit to try and discourage the fast ones. But this is the issue. If you look at the experience of Darwin, they allowed cycling on all footpaths with a speed of 20 k's, and they also relaxed the helmet laws. Now I know the Tuesday meeting, I think it was, or Wednesday meeting, don't introduce the helmet laws, but I think in terms of 700 metre distance to the shops is that utility cycling. It's an absolutely, it's an elephant which you can't ignore. What is your opinion if the state government seems as though it's going to be allowing footpath riding universally? And that looks as though it's very close to becoming law now. The other one is relaxing helmet laws. Would that not surely address that issue? Because for a 700-metre trip to the shops, finding the helmet for the incidental cyclist, and then having to deal with it at the other end, is a big issue to me.
Yeah, no, likewise. I think it would be incredibly positive that they relax that law around cycling class, and also the helmet laws, having a bit more latitude. And I mean, in practice, it does seem there is a little bit more latitude that the law actually states. Because I see people riding without helmets. I know a few in this room that may possibly do it occasionally, but yeah.
Absolutely no question in WA. We actually had a joint exercise with the police on the shared path up the coast.
Yeah.
And the police were so relaxed about people without helmets that it was obviously not an issue. But if you go to New South Wales, they just increased the fine for not wearing a helmet from $70 to 400 and something. Because you've got an absolute petrol head as the roads minister. And you've got Manly, which has a really good cycling culture, and the police turn a blind eye. But what are they going to do at $500 a fine?
Exactly. I lived in Sydney from 01 to 2009, and you know, back then it was kind of, you know, the quicker the dead, and the topography of Sydney lends itself a lot less to cycle than Perth does. But my feeling is it's a really retrograde step, this increase, and trading it off against like, oh, but we've given you the meter matters is just crap to me. And you know, it goes against all fundamentals of proportionality. You know, looking at the size of the cars and the damage a car can do versus I think it sends the wrong message.
And you've got a totally contradictory attitude by the police. We're actually going out there and finding people already, whilst publicly admitting that they're not going to enforce the law to passing this.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a question. Just to talk about the PSPs being spine and the need for a number of routes getting down to just people riding in suburbs on you know. What do you think can encourage that? What do you think?
I mean, you can't make segregated cycleways in every street. You can't retrofit them to every street, and the cost would be prohibitive. I think if there was a better network of segregated cycleways throughout the suburbs, that would be a good start. And then also, like I found when I was in Amsterdam, I was amazed. Some of the cycling infrastructure was really crappy, but the road culture was much more respectful of me being on a bike and wouldn't be like, get out of the way, you piece of shit. So I think it's a lot to do with cultural changes. And I mean, you know, like there's been the proposal around the cycle ring trying to, you know, do pragmatic things to start to link up. And I mean, as cyclists, I know I do that sort of stuff all the time, you know. I find little weird ways to avoid those busy roads. And it's just kind of formalising that sort of stuff so that it's more coherent and you're able to connect if you're not such an experienced cyclist. I don't want people to have to take 20 years to get that knowledge that I've got now. Hope that answers the question.
So just going to follow on from that, it's not difficult at all. I live down in Oakford on Rowley Road, where for most of the length of Rowley Road, there's a shoulder that sort of varies between 1 and 1.5 metres wide. Right on that bit, not a problem. You generally, the occasional truck buzzes you, but other than that, you know, it's pretty easy. Where the Shire of Serpentine Jarrahdale starts, they went and redid all the road. There's a 1.5 metre blue metal shoulder and no shoulder on the road. So I have to ride 1.2 kilometres of that to get home. That is my 1.2 kilometres of terror, because you're actually in the roadway. To actually bitumise a metre on either side for probably 3 kilometres of length would have been minuscule in the overall cost of actually redoing the road. So those kind of things are actually really simple to do, and it is a registered bicycle route, apparently.
And I mean, I know as a cyclist, you know, I'm sure we've all got points on our regular commutes that are like that, where, you know, you're just hoping you don't get hit, you know, basically. You're just like, I'm in the hands of the cycling gods now. And I personally hope that changes.
700 metre ride as a local through,
yeah,
and something similar would be commuting to work. And I'm lucky to have a bike share which hours at work, and if I didn't, I might not commute to work. But you know, I was thinking about doing something like Brisbane does within the trip facilities, just to have as little user experiences to make it a short.
Yeah, it seems to be a market-driven thing at the moment with private enterprise. I'm not familiar with what's happening in the city of Perth. I know, I went and had my bike today. I had to go and freshen up with David Jones.
Yeah, right.
It's not always ideal, but
and you've got to hack your own user experience rather than someone go to a place.
Yeah.
I don't even know if there's a big lock-up place yet. I heard there was on Elder Street.
Yeah. I think there's an automated facility on Elder Street. Were you talking about that the other day? Or was that someone else was talking about that? But yeah, I mean that sort of stuff. I think they're actually just starting up a bike share, bike valet people. Proposing to start up a bike share. I don't, that looks like a private initiative rather than a government-led one. I don't know how much that will, because I mean, if you look at Brisbane or Melbourne, the rate of uptake for the bike share is not that great, and some of the theories behind that is the health issue. But I think it all helps having a supportive cycling environment at work, somewhere to put the bike, having a locker to put your kit in. All of that stuff helps, and like at UWA, it's frankly been pretty crappy for a long time, but it is slowly getting better now. The message is getting out there that our constituents are cyclists as well.
Because it seems we have to work harder with the user experience, because in a car you don't have to have a shower.
Exactly.
So we have to sort of. So I think there's all these little things that make it it's too hard, it's obviously. Something that don't use.
That would be an insurmountable hurdle. Exactly.
I think one of the answers to the question about how can you deliver it is to actually look at the WABNP. There's no other page 3, which is the one that says that it's the state government really through the team within the Moving People Directorate that will actually sit down and negotiate with local governments ownership of the local bike route review. In other words, we need the state government to own the review process. And then what it effectively says then is that they will agree with each local government what is going to happen. And then they're responsible for coordinating it. But once that stage is agreed, then it's handed over to the local government to deliver on that with co-funding. It's all spelled out in a couple of paragraphs in page 3 of the WABNP. If we start, we engaged very early in Stirling with that. We wanted that out, we identified the routes we'll be relying on them to make sure that shires around fit in with that. But we expect the funding to come in because we're delivering on their objective.
And I mean, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that at the local council level, it's entirely optional.
Yes.
If the political will is there. So it's there in Fremantle, it's there in Vincent, it's there in Stirling.
Hopefully.
But, like I've heard that Gosnells has, been working on their bike plan and they're doing stuff now. But I mean, if you have to rely on the sort of passionate individual policy makers, I think there seems to be a little bit of a flaw in the system. I think it's better than anything.
We took ours into adopting a strategy which council endorsed, and now we, as the administration, implement that. We've yet to get to the stage of how much funding we need. What we actually need is 60 kilometres of route, which if we deliver it by 2031 or 15 years, we need to invest about $3 million a year. We haven't yet got to that rate with council, and we need the state government. Really, we may get to persuade council to put $1.5 million in, but we need the state government from that money. Separation between load share and funding actually comes to the party.
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, so we're going to have to leave it there. So just on behalf of myself and the club again, I'd like to thank Oliver for being here today.